Welcome back. In this tutorial, we are going to look at adding custom metadata and content formatting. When we chunk documents, they lose their broader context. We solve this by having LLM to generate a section summary and adding them back to chunks metadata. However, this creates a paradox. If a raw text chunk is 350 tokens and LLM generated summary is 150 tokens, and let's say our embedding model context size is 512 tokens. If we are using 150 tokens for metadata, which is nearly one third of total context size, we are only left with 362 tokens for actual content. This doesn't look correct. So Spring AI provides default content formatter, which acts as a firewall, letting us dynamically exclude massive metadata keys from the embedding process. So what we have to do is we must separate what the embedding model sees from what the chat model sees. Embedding view needs to be short and dense, whereas inference view needs all rich summaries, keywords, and context we can provide. Spring AI provides the default content formatter to act as a firewall, letting us dynamically exclude massive metadata keys from the embedding process. Now let's implement an API to demo custom metadata and content formatting. Let me add a get mapping. Let's name it as ingest custom formatted. Now define the method which takes input parameters URL, source, and author. Let me add a logger here which may help in debugging. Also, let's wrap this implementation within try catch block. Now first step, extraction and chunk. We reuse already defined methods. Now to this chunk data, I'll add 3 more metadata: source, author, and ingested at. So I have to define ingested at. Now let me define ingested time. Now next step is enrichment. Now let's call the method enrich documents and assign it to list of documents. Now let's look at default content formatter. Default content formatter dot builder. Now let's define with text template. This defines how the metadata and contents are formatted. Let's also define metadata template. We are using metadata template as key and value. Even if you don't provide this, by default, this is the format it's going to take. Now let's look at what are the metadata keys we are going to exclude in embedding. Section summary, previous section summary, next section summary, and keywords. By excluding these metadata keys, we are reducing the tokens which is going to be sent to the embedding model. Now let's exclude some of the metadata from inference. These are not needed for inferencing, so we are excluding it. Build. For each of the enriched documents, we are going to set this formatter. I'm adding a log here. Now extraction and the enrichment, that is transform, is complete. Let us now load these enriched documents to Redis vector store. Reuse the previous load in batches method. Now let's have a sample formatted doc so that we can send it in the response. Let's define the response. So we are sending status message, URL, source, and author. These are what we set as custom metadata, and chunks processed, sample formatted document length, that is this one, and sample metadata. Let's return the response. Now let's catch the exception. Now instead of this formatted length, I am sending entire sample formatted string in the response. Now let's build. And run. Let me bring up the Postman. Here I have already added this URL with get API ingest custom formatted, and I'm saying source Spring Docs, author, team, and the URL. We are sending this URL which we already used in earlier demo. So let me hit this API and wait for the response. Here you can see the label metadata which we specified in the code here, metadata. Let me search for the content. So here is the content. Now let's add two more key value pairs in the response. We already added this sample formatted. Now let me add two more. One is, instead of sample formatted, I'll say embed view, and I'll try to get the embed view. Similarly, inference view. Let me add it right after this sample formatted data, and I'll say embed view and inference view. Let me build and run it again. Run. While it is running, let me clear the Redis store. I'll do flush db sync. We'll run it and it clears the Redis vector store. Let me bring up the Postman and hit the same URL again. Let's wait for the response. Okay, there is a typo. That's fine. This is a embed view. In the metadata, you don't see the section summary here, but here in the inference view, you see the section summary. So it clearly shows we are excluding this section summary in the embedding to reduce contexts. You can also see here author, ingested at, source, these custom metadata tags we have added, and we excluded ingested at in the inference. Let's look at the response again. I'll search for the ingested at. It should be present. It is present in the sample metadata as well as here in the sample formatted and the embed view, but it is not present in the inference view. So excluding the metadata in the inference view also working. So now let's have look at the source code again. We took three input parameters, URL, source, and author. These two we are using it for custom metadata. We are attaching these metadata for each chunk document. In the first step, we are extracting and chunking it. Then we are adding the metadata here, enriching it. Then we define the default content formatter, where we define the text template. If you don't define this, the output will be something like we metadata string and line breaks and then content string. We won't be having these labels. And with metadata template, if you remove this, the output will not change. This is a default implementation, but here you can change the metadata template. But what it explicitly do, it converts Java maps into clean structured strings. That means even if you don't add this line, it works as well. So now here with excluded metadata keys creates the strict embedding firewall. Any metadata system key provided here is temporarily scrubbed from the document right before the embedding algorithm runs. So these all are excluded from the embedding. Similarly, whatever key we specify here will be excluded in the inference. So once we define the formatter, we apply this formatter for each enriched document, then we load it into the Redis vector store. This covers the custom metadata and using formatter to include, exclude metadata from embedding and metadata from inference. Let's wrap this tutorial here. In the next lesson, we'll look at security redaction, how we can make some kind of sensitive data not to reach LLM or redact that part of data and then send the content to LLM. We'll see you there.